Aloha again. You know, yesterday I talked to you about being born disabled, and I ended by saying that it's been a huge, great blessing to me. So I'm going to tell you why. Because sometimes we think that we're a mistake. If we're born differently than others, we think we're the problem. And it just isn't true. So some of the things I'm going to tell you are going to feel harsh and like they were difficult for me, and they were. My God, it took me to places I never could have come if I hadn't been born this way. So I guess the first thing I'll say is that because I was born disabled, I am extremely, and that's a small word, I am extremely psychic sensitive. Because I was in the incubator, I guess, nobody could come and talk to me. So I knew what was going on in the room with the other babies in their incubators and with the nurses who came into the room. I knew what they were thinking. I knew what I was communicating, not with sound, with words, but with their hearts. And so still, it confuses people because I have a hard time figuring out what was said out loud versus that I know exactly what was said from their sweethearts. So that's one of the gifts that has been true for me since I was born. Another thing is that because I couldn't be touched in the incubator, and even when I was touched, like if they fed me a bottle, it was with gloves on their hands, and they were just reaching inside a little hole in the side of the incubator. And so I didn't bond people. They didn't even know what it meant to be connected to one person versus another, because there was always a different nurse, there was always a different doctor, and so I thought I would be really messed up, but I'm not. I bond to people now, perhaps more than most, but I bond to their hearts. I bond to what they want, who they really are, not who they're saying that they are. And then I guess because I was always supposed to be dying, and I was always going back and forth between spirit and body. And so for me, there's no difference between being in a body or out of it. And that doesn't just mean that I'm not afraid of death, because of course I'm not. In fact, sometimes it would seem like a great relief, I guess, because it takes energy to struggle to maintain a body. But what I do know is that I'm so close to other people that I know when they're going to live or die. For example, one time, and I was paralyzed, I was in my bed, but the neighbor from across the street came to visit me, and after he left, I told my parents that he was dying, and they said, oh, he goes water skiing every weekend, he's perfectly healthy, he's wonderful, don't worry about him dying. But I said, no, there's black spots under his arms and he's gonna die. And a month later, he died of lymphatic cancer. And my parents, this is the hard part, my parents assumed that I had let the devil come through me to kill him. And so I had to learn to separate out from anybody else's opinion about anything. Another example of that is that, I was like an alien to them. They couldn't understand me. And so my mother stayed out of the way most of the time, and I was fed through tubes, and every day at noon, she would come in and tear a grilled cheese sandwich up into little tiny bits and stroke my throat and try to get me to swallow. And while we were doing that, we would be watching a soap opera together. So that was my main and pretty much only connection to my mother. And then my stepfather would come home from work at night, and he would come to the door. He'd say, "Are you well yet?" And I'd say, "No, not yet." He'd say, "Well, I guess God still hates you." And I can't tell you how difficult that was, of course, but what a blessing that was, because I had to ask myself my own questions. Almost everything was between me and a lot of times I didn't have enough oxygen to talk. And so here I was, just talking to God, so to speak. And yeah, I learned to hide my psychicness for several years because I didn't want to get blamed for anything. But in the long run, my God, sensitivity in me, this knowing in me was building. And then the final thing that I really love about being born disabled is that because I couldn't connect to people in any normal way, the only way I know how to say it is that I didn't get indoctrinated like other people do. I didn't have to agree with people about whatever they thought about politics or love or God. I didn't have to withdraw from people because I was already withdrawn. And I knew, without a doubt, that this was a blessing, that God was made of love, because if I could love this much, if I could be this tender with my parents who didn't get me at all, if I could love this much so that I could know who people really were at the very core of themselves versus who they were pretending to be so that they would fit in. If I could love that much, then God must be even more love. So have fun thinking about that inside yourself. What are the things that you have learned and have held on to because you're wired differently than others?